All right, lesson point 8. All right, lesson 8.3. This is video 2, multiplying and dividing rational expressions. So, in the last lesson, we actually simplified expressions that look just like this one on the front. Now, what we're actually going to do is we're going to multiply these. Okay. So there isn't really a whole lot of difference. Remember, if there's a plus or a minus sign involved in the expression, in other words, each of the numerators or any of the numerators and denominators include a polynomial, which has a plus or minus sign, then remember that you have to actually do all the factoring first. So take one piece at a time. So if we start off with this part right here, it's not a trinomial, so I can't just find the factors of the last one that add up to be the first one. So in that case, you need to look for, especially if you have an x squared, look for a greatest common factor. Now between your coefficients, all you have is a 2 and a 1. So we're not going to be able to pull out any number. The other one is I have an x squared and an x. So the greatest common factor that I can factor out is an x. And then we have to divide. So x squared divided by x gives me x. 2x divided by x gives me a 2, so just minus 2. On the bottom, we have a trinomial. So you find what two factors can multiply together to get you 1. And really the only 2 is 1 times 1. And 1 plus 1 does give us 2. So I end up with x plus 1 and x plus 1. Okay, and it's times. And on the top, looking for factors that multiply to get us 3, that add together to give us, add together to give us 4. So 3 times 1 will give us 3, and when I add those, I get 4. So it ends up being x plus 3, x plus 1. Okay? And on the bottom, if you notice, again, I don't have a trinomial, so you've got to look for that greatest common factor. And they both have an x included. And then so x squared divided by x gives me x. 3x divided by x gives me 3. Okay? And then once everything is factored, so you basically get a pair of binomials in all of these. Remember, anything on top can be canceled with anything on the bottom. So I have a single x, so I can cancel this one and this one. I have an x minus 2 on top, but notice on the bottom, I don't have any x minus 2's anywhere on the bottom. And x plus 3 here can be canceled with this x plus 3. And this x plus 1 can cancel with one of the x plus 1s. Don't cancel both of them. If you mark one off on top, you can only mark one off on the bottom. Okay. So the only thing that's left is an x minus 2 over x plus 1. Okay. All right. So go ahead. Example 2 is a U-try. So go ahead and look at example number 2. Pause the video and go ahead and try this one on your own. Okay. So let's go ahead and do this one. So just like the last one, I need to go ahead and try to factor this one. So let's go ahead and factor this. So two things that multiply together to give me a negative 3. So I'm just going to do a negative 3 and a positive 1. When I add them, though, I get a negative 2. So remember, all I got to do is switch my signs. So it gives me a positive 3, negative 1. When I multiply those, it still gives me a negative 3. But when I add it, it gives me a positive 2. So my polynomial gets factored into x plus 3, x minus 1. And on the bottom, we have just an x plus 2 because there's no x squared on there, so I can't factor it. And up on top, remember, I don't have a trinomial, so the only thing I can do is factor out that x. Okay, and on the bottom, remember this one. I don't remember from the previous video, but this one is a difference of squares. In that the first one's a perfect square and the last one is a perfect square. So those are the ones that end up x plus 1, x minus 1. Okay. Once everything is factored, all 4 items are factored. Everything on the top, everything on the bottom that can be factored is factored. Then we're going to take a look again and mark off things that are the same. So we have an x plus 3 on top, but I don't have any x plus 3's on the bottom to cancel. I have an x minus 1, so I can mark this x minus 1 and this one off. I have a plain x, but I don't have any plain x's on the bottom. And then the only other thing is an x plus 2. Can be marked off with this x plus 2. Okay, so on top I have x times x plus 3, and on the bottom I have an x plus 1. Okay, as your final answer. Okay. Now the only difference that we're going to get into with example number 3 is when we divide. Now if you remember, when we divide fractions, let's say we had 2/3 divided by 4/3. Well, remember, when we divide fractions, the only thing we have to do is flip the second fraction, and then you can multiply. Okay, you can still cancel 1, 2. Okay, so you end up with 1/2. So before we can start off on this one, the very first thing that we do is this fraction right here has to be flipped. So I get x squared over x squared minus 1 times x plus 1 over 3x. So then you need to go through, x squared can't be factored. This one has a plus or has a minus sign, so you got to ask, can I factor it? And the answer is yes, I can factor it. Remember, this one's a perfect square, that one's a perfect square, so it's x plus 1, x minus 1 times, on top I get x plus 1 because it can't be factored, and this one doesn't have an equal sign, I mean a plus or minus sign, so that one can't be factored. So then as we're factoring, I can cancel one factor of x is here with this one factor of x down at the bottom. And then the only other thing is I have an x plus 1 that can be canceled with an x plus 1. So on top, I'm left with x over 3 times x minus 1. Let's rewrite that. 3 times x minus 1. Okay? Okay. All right, so our example number 4 is a U-try. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can do this one on your own. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at this one. So first of all, since this is a divide sign, I have to flip the second fraction. So x squared minus 9x minus 22 over x squared plus 5x minus 24 times x minus 3 over x plus 2. Okay? And then when you're looking, remember we have a trinomial, we have an x squared, so we've got to see if we can factor it. So since it's a trinomial, I got to find those factors of 22 that add up to be -9. So I get 1 and 22, actually it's a -22. I could do -2 and 11, but remember I got to switch the sign so I get my negative. So it's going to be x plus 2, x minus 11. And on the bottom, I'm looking for -24. So -1 and 24, -2 and 12, -3 and 8, and that's the pair that gives me my positive 8. So x minus 3, x plus 8 times x minus 3 over x plus 2. Okay. So just like we've been doing, you can cancel anything that's the same on top as it is on the bottom. So x plus 2 and x plus 2, x minus 3 and x minus 3. So I get x minus 11 over x plus 8. That's my final answer. Okay. All right, the last one, this is a closing example. Just to give you a quick idea, this is a multiply, so there's no flipping involved. So I get x squared minus 5x minus 14 over x squared minus 6x minus 7. And you treat this just like a whole number, so we're just going to put it over 1. So since I have 3 trinomials, the very first thing that we're going to have to look at is we've got to factor this. So let's find what multiplies to get me -14. So let's try -2 and 7. Well, let's switch the sign, so I get -5. So I get x plus 2, x minus 7. And on the bottom, -7, well, that gives me a -6. I'm sorry, -7 times 1, and that gives me a -6. So I get x minus 7 and x plus 1 times, and on the top, a -5. I get a -5 times 1. That gives me my -4. X plus 1. And on the bottom, I just have a 1. So remember, anything on top can be canceled with anything on the bottom. And this is one thing I want to point out. Notice how this one is a 1. This one is an x plus 1. So I can't simply, because of this plus, these two are combined together. So I can, however, since I have an x plus 1 on top and an x plus 1 down here, those can be canceled. Okay? And then the only other thing is I have an x minus 7 here and an x minus 7 here. So I'm left with, since everything on the bottom cancels but this 1, I don't have to write it. So it's just x plus 2 times x minus 5 as your final answer. Okay? All right. Well, make sure you do some of the practice problems, check your answers, and then make sure you complete the quick check.